thinking area of the place that is supported economically from the restaurant. So the co-working create the identity of the place, the social identity of the place, and the restaurant provide for the economic resource. Responsible tourism is the other part of our project that start from the idea to change the point of view when we speak about migrants in our local context, because we always think
using a critical Indigenous lens. Current heritage laws in Australia perpetuate colonialism, which is the mechanism for the marginalisation, the domination, the discrimination and the exclusion of Aboriginal people from heritage protection. Just to give you a brief history, a background history, a lot of laws protecting heritage in Australia were originally drafted in the 1970s, and so they're quite old now, and a lot of them have not altered to significant effect to reflect momentous changes that have occurred in Australian society over time. So fast forward to the present, when an incident like what happened in Australia in late 2020 in remote Western Australia occurs, it is hard for Aboriginal people to get a sense or real justice for the trauma they sustain as a result.
Yani ben burada loading'de yaptığımız aktivitelerden ziyade loading'in hakikaten mekansallığına biraz vurgu yapmak istiyorum. Nasıl bir ortamda mekansallaştığını ve neye tavır ve tutum sergilediğini göstermek istiyorum. Öncelikle biraz kent tarihini açmak gerekiyor sanırım. Mezopotamya ve Anadolu uygarlıklarının değerli kültürleri bağlamında birçok kültür ve inancın bir potada yaşatılmaya çalışıldığı, yaşadığı, günümüze kadar geldiği kentlerden biri olarak.
Of the testimonies of women who represent important organizations in Colombia, such as the Peasant Reserve Zones Association and the Black Communities Process in Colombia. So I'm going to give you a brief context of the politics of memory in Colombia in the context of the peace process. On November 29 and 30 of 2016, the Colombian government ratified a historical peace accord with the left-wing guerrilla group, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia People's Army. I'll refer to this as the FARC from here on. According to the Unidad de Víctimas in 2019, this long-lasting armed conflict has left more than 8 million officially recognized victims. Colombia's post-accord period. So it is in this context of ongoing conflict, violence, and coloniality where I want to pose an agenda for decolonial feminist praxis to understand heritage processes in place. Following the work of decolonial, anti-racist, and communitarian feminists working from Latin America, this praxis, not as concrete theory or school of thought, seeks to strategically undermine the ways in which women's bodies and women in the developing world have been respectively constructed as objects and as victims who need saving.
Developed by the British Museum some time ago, and it reframes some of 15 objects of the collections which are on permanent display in the museum located in different galleries from an LGBT and queer perspective, and a trail that has been called Desire, Love and Identity. The short stories that are presented span across cultures and times, conveying a powerful message, I think. That is to say that non-binary gender identities and non-heteronormative views of relationships and sexualities have always been existed and celebrated in different ways in different work cultures. However, when it comes to analyzing interpretation, I think it's always interesting to interrogate what type of knowledge is presented and ask the question, who is speaking here? And although the British Museum has moved towards what we can call for now an inclusive approach, into brackets perhaps, it still perpetuates an expert point of view, as the labels and interpretation has been provided by the staff and the curators who works inside the museum. So it's still a tradition.
Of sharing with you all some of the projects that I've been working on that address the idea of local learning, and specifically thinking about what can I do, so what can we individually do to, in a sense, resist erasure of histories of people, and also bring in to the fore the voices of people about whom we often talk, and also whose objects we find in the museum space. And of course, I'm coming to these questions from the museum heritage perspective, because that's my profession, that's my background, that's my interest. And
he is, and he's an incredible storyteller. He was volunteer on Multaka Oxford, and Multaka means meeting point in Arabic, and it's a program that provides platforms for intercultural exchange and learning for people who are settling in Oxford and people who live in Oxford, and for people around the world. But this is the Mumbira, and the Mumbira is from Zimbabwe. Now, at the Pit Rivers, it's in a case called lamellophones, and it's said it's from Rhodesia. So you can see that's problematic right from the start. Lamellophone is Latin for small metal plate and Greek for small voice. Now, Tabu, when he was doing his tour guiding, he had no idea what a lamellophone was, and certainly doesn't recognise the term Rhodesia for his country. But the Latin name is the only name that's present in the museum and on the database.
They should recognize indigenous people are this, and I belong to Bunun, Ataya, and Ganaganavu Nation, and at the core of my approach is indigenous cultural practice, which has served as a principal means for responding to Bunun ontological relationship with Maluskun Mastala. The Bunun concept of
a facet, an aspect of, in Nicaragua, these Chorotega traditions, which El Huayhuense comes from Chorotega people, we see within Nicaragua's national drive for tourism, mixing of these different kinds of performances. So we see here what is supposed to be El Huayhuense, or is forwarded as being El Huayhuense, but we also see other performances. We see in the front is either Diablito or someone from Aguizotes.
I realize I don't have much time, but back to the geographical landscape that I'm talking about. So the British border is located in northern France, in Calais. Similarly, the French border is located in Kent, but that's much less of a problem. So Calais has become this sort of like experimental place in which Europe sort of tries on with this sort of external border regime that they've got. So the EU has exported this border to third-party states such as Niger and Turkey and Libya. This one is happening sort of inside of Europe, and it's a British border, so it's a bit of a strange situation. It serves the British government very well because they can pretend that the refugee crisis, I'm using that word, but so the refugee situation is a French problem, not a British one. And it's kind of interesting to see how that's going to evolve with Brexit. But since 2014, the British government has sent quite a lot of money for France to sort of manage this border. And the situation there was dreadful in 2015 and 16, and still very much is to this day. Like, it's getting worse and worse, and like the violence.
I am currently the director of the Paleo Research Institute at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. It is actually an honor for me to be invited to speak at this webinar. And I hope through this webinar, we will all work together to find some of the solutions to the problems that we see being presented by sites that have been ratified and included into the World Heritage List. And today I'm going to talk about the Cradle of Humankind World Heritage Site in South Africa. I just want to give a background to what I'm going to be discussing, so that I don't want to take advantage of the fact that people might be aware of what is going on in South Africa, or the background to the Cradle of Humankind and our involvement with UNESCO and World Heritage listings. As a whole lot of you might be aware, South Africa in the 70s was expelled from the UN.
Inequalities among stakeholders through the participatory management system. Now we're using case studies of Nigeria heritage sites. Nigeria became a signatory to the World Heritage Convention in 1974. And on the World Heritage List, Nigeria has 2 sites, which are the Osun-Osogbo Sacred Grove and the Sukuru Cultural Landscape. Interestingly, these are the only 2 sites that enjoy the community-based protection, alongside the protection that is offered by the National Commission for Museums and Monuments, amidst over 60 sites that are national monuments in Nigeria. The participatory